Hi, my name is Tracy Woodard, and I'm president of Hausers. We are an Atlanta-based nonprofit that started at Georgia Tech at the School of Architecture back in the 80s, and we built small, affordable, modular shelters for homeless people and give them away for free. We built hundreds of them all over Atlanta. We built some up in Athens, Georgia, New York City, Italy, Switzerland. If you would like to build one, they cost about $550 in materials, and you can download the blueprints for free at our website, madhausers.org. One of the things that we're doing during coronavirus is offering family building kits where we can order the lumber or deliver lumber to families who would like to build a Madhauser shelter on their property. And then once they've completed the construction, we go take the panels, sanitize it, and deliver it to a homeless client here in Atlanta who needs it. If you would like to learn more about the way that we engage with homeless people in Atlanta, you can contact me or comment on this video. But yes, we give it away for free. And the idea is that the shelters are not meant to be permanent, but that they are a temporary stepping stone between living on the street and getting into permanent housing.
This is the Hauser shelter that we have in our backyard. As you can tell, nobody's living in it right now, but we've had it for several years, and it doesn't really need any repairs beyond maybe a little extra roofing tiles on top. But we have had several people stay in it. The first resident stayed for a little over a year, and he was an older black guy who had a job working at the baseball stadium. Oh, look, the kids came to the back. And afterwards, we've had people stay in, but very briefly, usually for 1 to 5 days. And those are people who were in an emergency situation where they were just being discharged from a hospital, or they had been attacked downtown and just need to go somewhere for a little respite. And the two big questions that people ask about, well, how can I have one on my property, is they ask about land and they ask about the tenant. Now the land that, where people are like, well, where can I build it? If it's your property, it's really between you and the neighbors. Most neighborhoods that we run into, as long as it's out of sight, if it's in the trees, if it's behind a fence, and if the person living in the structure kind of keeps to themselves, doesn't leave any trash, nobody would even notice that they're there. I mean, look at this structure. Doesn't it look like a tool shed? Looks like a tool shed. We've had several people in there, never been a problem with the neighborhood. We have had 1 or 2 instances where a neighborhood found out that we were going to build one in somebody's backyard, and they had a problem with it because, what if homeless people bring in crime? That is something to consider. But by and large, if you know your neighbors and you know of a good spot where you can put it, where it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, it's not going to be an issue. The second is, who's going to live in it? So the last several people that we brought in were referred by us by another organization. So there was a church or a nonprofit agency that said, hey, we have this person, they're in a bad situation. Can they stay in the structure for a few days? And we've learned to sort of eyeball people, and we can tell if they're going to be an issue. They've never been an issue. But that is an assessment that you have to do on your own. Perhaps there's a homeless person in your neighborhood, and they would do very well to stay in a place like this just to sort of have a measure of peace and calm and help get their situation together. And you have to work it out with that client and say, hey, is this going to be a good fit for you? Is it walking distance from services and from the grocery store and the bus stop? And is because you might have a lot of land. You might live out in the middle of chicken country and it's 30 miles from the nearest bus. That's not going to be great for the average homeless person who's on foot. So these are just things to keep in mind if you decide to put one of these structures on your property. One of the other concerns that people ask about if they decide to put one of these Hauser structures on their land is, what if they have to go to the bathroom? Well, most homeless people, if they've been living in the woods, they just go in the woods. Or they're walking distance to a gas station or a shop or someplace that will let them use the restroom so they can use the toilet and wash up. But one of the things that we offer our guys is this composting sawdust toilet, which is literally 2 5-gallon buckets. One is full of sawdust and one you do your business in, which is especially useful for people who maybe their legs give out very easily and they literally can't get in and out of bed too many times a day because of their health. And this is something they can put next to the bed, and it's a lot easier to use. So sawdust composting toilets are a cheap, easy alternative for someone who doesn't have access to a toilet and they're in one of these structures. As far as washing up, as far as laundry, we just let them use our washing machine. You know, we go to them every couple of days and say, hey, do you want us to toss some stuff on the load? That's probably the easiest solution. If they are on your property, but they are deep in the woods, and you're not going to see them as often, I would just talk to them about scheduling appointments to local coin laundries or local places. Such in Atlanta, we have the Gateway Center, and they offer free showers for adult men and women, but that is something that you will have to take into consideration.
So why do we build the shelters with Mad Hausers? So we believe that everybody deserves a place to sleep. And people on the streets, they come to the streets with all kinds of problems, but the streets that you get from living on the streets are infinitely worse. People end up homeless usually because they lose their job, or there was a death in the family, or there was a divorce, or they were sick and the hospital bills ate up all their savings. There's usually a short list of reasons why someone ends up on the streets. But the things that can happen to you on the streets are even worse. You can get beaten up, you could be arrested, you can have a mental disability, you could become addicted to drugs or alcohol. I just came from Bridge Camp this morning. They found 2 bodies. It is extremely dangerous. So it is in our best interest to not only prevent homelessness, but to help somebody transition from the street into a safer situation as cheaply and efficiently as possible. Before we talk about solutions for homelessness in Atlanta, I want us to do a little thought experiment on the word homeless. I have chosen some current day news headlines and I've substituted one word. You can probably guess what it is. And I want you to note your personal reaction as I read these headlines to you with one word substitution. 4,000 women seek shelter at Atlanta airport. Federal judge rules that Los Angeles must house women. Man brings portable sinks to women to curb coronavirus. Healthcare for Women launches COVID-19 testing site thanks to generous donations. Council to decide whether funding should help small businesses or women. Obviously, I've substituted the word homeless for women, but notice that when I changed that word, it sounded a bit patronizing. Now, what if I changed homeless for men? Would it sound threatening? Would it sound like it would require less of your sympathy? What does that word homeless ring inside of us when we hear it? And we need to think about our reaction when we hear that word, because the homeless population is not just this one homogenous blob of people. These are individuals. These are humans. And it can be hard to empathize if we've never known anybody who slept in the street or who has been one paycheck away from poverty. But that is why it is so critical in this part of your education that we start going into the field and building relationships with the homeless so that we can see them as the individuals we are, so that we can have a better sense of what kind of solutions will be best fit for them. So let's talk about some of the ways that Mad Hausers helps homeless in Atlanta. So we build these small shelters for them, which automatically helps their standard of living because they're sleeping better. They can lock up their stuff when they're at night, when they're asleep. And then if they have to go somewhere during the day, they can lock up their stuff and not worry about it. And just being able to sleep and not have to worry, being inside of an enclosed space where there's 4 walls and a locking door and it's actually dark at night is huge for your mental health. I mean, to give an example, if you've ever had to sleep overnight in an airport and baggage claim, it is impossible to sleep because there's bright lights and there's announcements all the time, and maybe the security dog is coming and sniffing your things, and you're on top of your stuff because you don't want someone to just go off with your suitcase, you know. And imagine sleeping in baggage claim for years and years. What kind of person would you become? Would you become very paranoid? Would you become distrustful? Would you become agitated easily, right? It changes a person being on the street. So by putting somebody in a space where they can be more themselves and they can relax, then you can have a different conversation and you can talk about long-term goals with them. And that's what we try to do. We go into the homeless camps and we engage with them again and again and again, and start to help them branch out and think about other things. Like, let's talk about your health. Let's talk about employment. Let's talk about education. Let's talk about permanent housing. Now, as far as Atlanta organizations that go the next step, I'll list a few. My favorite is Mercy Care, which is a branch of St. Joseph's Hospital, and they have what's called the street medicine team. They go into homeless encampments on a weekly basis, and they offer free medical care, primary care, psychiatric. They have foot doctors. They have dentists in the clinic. Prescriptions are free. Everything is free. And this is huge because there are a lot of people, and if you've been on the streets for years, you may not know you're sick because you have normalized pain, you have normalized discomfort. You're always kind of low level feeling like trash. And so by having a professional say, oh, wait, this thing that you're feeling is you're actually super depressed, or this injury that never quite got better, that's actually an infection, right? And so by coming in and giving this issue a name, the homeless person can kind of, handle a little more easily and say, oh, this is a thing, maybe now I can work on it. So street medicine teams are fantastic. We have In-Town Collaborative Ministries, which does case management in the homeless encampments, where we're going in and we're helping people get their ID. Because if you're on the streets, you get stolen, your stuff stolen all the time. And if you don't have ID, if you don't have a cell phone, you can't get anything done. You can't make a doctor's appointment. You can't do a job interview. You can't apply for a bank account. So we help people get their documentation, birth certificate, social security card, state ID, social security benefits, their DD-214 if they're a veteran, so that they can get back onto the grid. A unique project that Atlanta is doing for the homeless during coronavirus is the Noncongregate Hotel. Selman paid for 2 hotels, one for people who tested positive for COVID and need to be in isolation, and one for people who tested negative for COVID but have underlying medical conditions that make them vulnerable. So maybe they're immunocompromised or have high blood pressure or kidney damage, any of these things. And the idea is that you get your own hotel room free of charge for 90 days, 3 meals a day, and a case manager to help you get your documentation in order, with the ultimate goal of getting you a housing voucher that covers rent for the first year. This was not paid for by the government. This was paid for by private donation. We don't know who did it. But this is a system that we saw over in Austin, Texas, where they would sweep the homeless encampments, put them into SROs. And that is something that I would definitely like to see Atlanta work on after the coronavirus, where you house first and document later, because right now that's backwards. What we're doing now is we're requiring people to have a pile of documents identifying who they are before they can be even referred to housing. And it makes everyone's lives hard because we have clients who are in very perilous situations where they don't feel safe. It's hard for them to stay in communication with social services. And they have very little incentive to get these documents in order. If you were sleeping under a bridge and I said, hey, I've got this apartment for you, but first you have to get these 6 documents in order, which is a Kafkaesque level of bureaucracy that nobody enjoys, to be referred to an apartment that might not be available for another year. Another thing that Atlanta has been developing over the last years that they've done right is a collaboration of outreach agencies called Partners for Home. And basically means that a number of organizations, it could be Mercy Care, Salvation Army, Hope Atlanta, Atlanta Mission, In-Town Collaborative Ministries, all these outreach organizations are sharing data with each other about their clients and sharing case management and social services and outreach services and getting these people into housing. And that's how it should be. The best example of this on a municipal level is New York City. Of course, the state of New York, they made housing a human right in their state constitution after a lawsuit back in the 70s. And the state pays for a lot of homeless services that we just don't have down here. If I were homeless in New York City and I walked into some places, hey, I slept on the sidewalk last night, I need a bed tonight, they have to put you in the bed. They have to find you someplace to go. And they house you, and then after the fact, they worry about documentation. Whereas here, it's the opposite. So I am hoping that this Noncongregate Hotel sets an example. It's like, yes, we can put somebody in a hotel room while case managing them. And again, you have the barrier to having more of that is people are always worried about liability. People are like, well, what if they're dangerous? What if they make a mess? What if they do drugs? What if they bring their girlfriend? And that can happen, but not everybody's going to do that. And so to lower that level of risk, that means going individual by individual and doing honest individual risk assessment with your clients and really figuring out what kind of person they are and what kind of threat they actually are. Because most people, they don't want to get into trouble. They just want a place to rest their head. But until we have an army of social workers to go and into the population and do this kind of individual risk assessment, it's going to be a lot harder to sell the idea of lower liability to agencies as a whole. The easiest and most inexpensive tool that you can give to homeless people in Atlanta are cell phones. We have the Obama Phone program where you can get a free cell phone with 60 minutes a month of free cell phone usage if you can prove that you are receiving some sort of federal benefit. So if you're receiving food stamps or Medicaid or Social Security, you qualify for an Obama phone. However, a lot of our clients don't even have that kind of federal benefit. And if you don't have a phone, you can't connect with anybody. So handing out free cell phones would be a huge and helpful tool. Another tool is giving out free MARTA passes. We at In-Town Collaborative Ministries are able to give out clients free round-trip MARTA passes. And obviously now with coronavirus, the buses are free. But if we could give free transit access to homeless people, that would also take away a huge barrier because then they can actually get places, because right now what they're having to do is walk. They walk for miles and miles. Another important tool that we need to allow access for the homeless people is access to banks and lines of credit. Georgia Credit Union will open up accounts for people for, I believe, $5 if you co-sign. But we need to make banks more accessible so that they can actually receive income. We work with a lot of low-income workers, and maybe they do small pickup work. Maybe they're day laborers, or they work at restaurants, or they do house cleaning, or something like that. But they work in the cash economy, and they are extremely vulnerable. Sometimes they don't get paid. Or if they get a check, they have to go to a check cashing place and they lose 10%. And it's just a very shady business. If we could make it easier for people to get bank accounts and to access those bank accounts, I believe Georgia Credit Union allows you to do cash withdrawals and pay bills at CVS pharmacies. That would be a huge boon to the low-income wage earners of Atlanta. So one of the labor practices in Atlanta that we can definitely improve on is the sadly common practice of construction companies hiring homeless people to work on fixing up houses and then kicking them off once the property is sold. This happens all the time where we are in South Atlanta, where people are improving houses. They hire homeless people to work on the drywall and the concrete and the plumbing, the electrical. In exchange, the homeless people are allowed to stay on the property as informal security guards to make sure people aren't stealing the copper, but they're not paid. And once the property is sold, they're then kicked out. An improvement would be housing construction projects where you hire homeless people to fix up the houses. You give them off-site shelter at night, pay them wages. When the construction is completed, you offer them a sliding scale rental lease on that house. So if they choose to, they can move into that house that they helped improve. And usually sliding scale leases are 30% of your income. And during the construction process, if they don't feel like they have a means of long-term income, if they have a disability, or they have a criminal record that prevents them from finding permanent employment, you can help them enroll in benefits. But offering them affordable housing that they themselves worked on is a much more hopeful project than simply letting them stay in an empty shell of a house and hoping they don't get arrested for criminal trespass. Another barrier for a lot of homeless people into getting out of poverty is the commute. So in Atlanta's big. Atlanta has a sort of underfed transit system. So we have a lot of clients, and maybe they have a job and maybe they found a place to rent. But those two places are 2 hours away by Atlanta bus. If they own a car, it might only be 15 minutes. But if you are relying on the public transit system, it can eat up a lot of your time and make it very hard to stay housed, or to even want housing. We had a number of clients who maybe their job didn't finish until 3 in the morning, which means the buses don't run. So they have to sleep where they are or sleep in the train station. Or they sleep behind their business. I've had clients and they were security guard for Burger King and the buses stopped. So they slept behind the Burger King and got arrested for trespassing. That's no fun. So if we could improve the transit system or come up with alternatives, it could be, having companies provide shuttles for low-income workers, so they're not having to spend nearly as much time on buses, or ride shares, or free bicycles, or any number of other solutions, so that these people aren't losing as much time in the commute to their jobs. So let's talk about fantasy. If we had infinite piles of money and infinite number of people that we could staff to work on homelessness, the first thing that I would work on is just free housing. If you were to go to Boys Town, Nebraska, it was started by a Jesuit priest back during the Depression, and he gave housing away to orphans. He was like, if you can get here, you get to live here. And it is still operating. I have friends, and they run a group home for 7 boys. And that kind of thing should be available for adults everywhere in America, where there is subsistence housing and permanent housing, and it is available for people. And you have to get past some philosophical barriers with neighborhoods to make that happen, because people have this idea of what they want in their neighborhood, and people are like, well, I want to live in a neighborhood of single family housing where everyone is beautiful and has a PhD and goes to yoga class with me, and that's super. But communities need to include everybody. We're hopefully past the days of redlining. We can't just draw people off. It's like, oh, you're in that group. Well, we can't have you live in this neighborhood. And that, by and large, tends to happen to renters all the time. I go to a lot of housing community meetings, and they hate renters. They hate them because they have this idea that renters are going to lower property values and they're going to bring crime. And that's doubly true when they talk about bringing in homeless shelters. So we need to start including homeless housing and subsidized housing into every community, and not just putting it into like one little part of town. One of the problems that we run into subsidized housing like Cabrini Green, or even Atlanta where we had the Peachtree Pine Shelter, is that we were trying to stuff hundreds and hundreds of people, and we're just warehousing all the poor people into one spot. And that doesn't always work. So what would be better from a city planning point of view is if we spread it out. It would be easier for the community to absorb strangers and absorb these people who need a little more from social services. One of the organizations in Atlanta that has done a really good job of this idea of offering affordable housing, but having it spread all over Atlanta so it's not just in one neighborhood, is Pad Split. And what they did was they got around the boarding house laws. So back in 2005, we used to have boarding houses all over Atlanta. They were like little old ladies with giant houses. They'd rent out rooms a week at a time. That went away after Hurricane Katrina because they didn't want refugees coming in from Mississippi. So they changed the boarding houses. The boarding house law used to say if your house had a bathroom that was accessible 24 hours a day, you could call yourself a boarding house. 2005, they changed the law so that each bedroom had to have its own individual kitchen and bath unit, which basically means you're building apartments. So the boarding houses kind of went away, above board at least. What Pad Split does is they don't put a person's name on a house's lease, they put the corporation on the lease. And then they rent those rooms out to people on a weekly or monthly basis. And this kind of housing solution is fantastic because A, we have a bunch of empty houses that need filling. We have a bunch of low-wage earners who need someplace, but they're not in a situation where they're ready to purchase a house outright. They need a stepping stone, right? And something like a boarding house is a great alternative while you're sort of building up your savings and getting yourself in a situation where you can do something that's more permanent. Another project in Atlanta, as far as affordable housing, is the Atlanta Land Trust. And the idea there is that you own the house, but you don't own the land that it's on, which I suppose is kind of like trailer parks. But that's another entity that Atlanta has that is shunned. They hate trailer parks. And it's really too bad because, if you go down to Florida, they're everywhere. It's like one of the most affordable ways that you can own a property. So that is another housing alternative that we could definitely explore more in Atlanta. But a lot of it is just being able to accept that this is a housing alternative because, again, a lot of people have this image of what a trailer park is like. And, we just need to accept it. It's like, look, this is going to be the most affordable option for some people, and it is better than nothing. It is better than living in your car. One of the most important things that this quarantine has taught agencies in Atlanta is that it's okay to give free things away to people, not just to the people at the very bottom, not just to low-income people, but to everybody. It's okay to give away stimulus checks, free medical tests, to make the buses free, to give away food at the pantries. It is okay to not get a return on your investment, right? And this is something that needs to continue after the quarantine. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We can afford to give away free things to the poor. And this is something not just on an individual basis, but on a corporate basis that we need to start thinking, is that to feel that it is acceptable to operate in an acceptable margin of loss when we help people. And that's sort of the philosophy with Matt Hauser. It's like, we build these things and we don't have grants. We operate on individual donations, but we build it and we give it away for free. And we don't expect anything in return. We're not charging rent. We're not proselytizing. That person might live in that hut for 30 years. That's their choice. But we give them this choice, right? And that's the thing, is that when you help them, when you help anybody, you are serving them. You should serve somebody and not expect anything in return, right? You serve somebody until that person no longer needs you.